Okay, so in the last video, we started talking about the funeral games in Book 5 and like how we can interpret Roman values from those funeral games. And we started talking at the end about piety and family values in the Aeneid. In this video, we're going to finish talking about domestic religion and how that applies here in Books 5 and 6, and then finish up our discussion with the underworld scenes, also called a katabasis, which is a Greek word for a going to the underworld. So what do I mean when I say domestic Roman religion? Well, I mean the religious practices and the gods that the Romans worshipped in the home itself. So this is very, very different from the pantheon that you're familiar with like Jupiter and Juno and Venus and all of those guys. Okay, so very, very different from that. This is what happened at the level of the house and the level of the family, and not at the level of the state. Okay. So, for instance, Aeneas invokes one of the gods of domestic religion called Alar, L-A-R, after Anchises' ghost leaves. So we get this passage at the end of Book 5. Virgil writes, "As Aeneas spoke, he was rekindling the hearth fire, and he paid reverence to the Lar of Pergamum and to Vesta, with salted meat and clouds of incense." So what the heck even is a Lar? Well, Alar, or in plural, the Lares, were sort of the protective spirits of a household and a family. So the most modern equivalent is like the idea of a guardian angel in Christianity. Okay, so these were spirits that existed in kind of an ethereal plane, and they watched over both the house and the family. So here I'm showing you an image of a wall painting that's extant in Pompeii of a household shrine to the Lares and the other gods of domestic religion. Okay, so here on either side, on the left and the right, on the top half, we have the Lares. Okay, these are two gods pouring things out of these little cornucopia, and we're not sure why they were depicted in this way, but they are the Lares. So these are what Aeneas is referencing when he says the Lar of Pergamum. And if you remember our discussion from the last video about Aeneas as the pater familias, here in this painting we have a figure of the pater familias, the head of the family, making a sacrifice to these household gods in the painting itself. Okay, so this is outlined right here in the middle in red, and this is a representation of the pater familias, which is the same role that Aeneas takes on in Book 5. But you might be wondering, what the heck are these like snake things doing on the bottom half of the painting? Well, those are something called the genii loci, or the genius, the genius of place. So these were kind of like the Lares. They are protective spirits, but they presided over the natural world that a certain shrine inhabited. Okay, so if the Lares protect your household and your family and everything that happens in that household, the genii loci protect the space on which your house sits. Okay, so this is like the connection between the family and the pater familias and the natural world itself. Here's another representation of a shrine in which you see the pater familias in the middle, making a sacrifice, two Lares on either side of him. The Lares are almost always depicted in two, and we have one serpent or genius loci below hand. Okay, and so you can also see how this shrine fits into a certain context with this other image. So it was engraved on a wall, and there would have been a table or something in front of it on which the family would place offerings, and they would also place their what are called the penates, which are what Aeneas is carrying out of Troy. So as opposed to the Lares, the genii, the pater familias, all of that, the penates are kind of like family heirlooms that the Romans would keep and worship in a certain sense. They represented the ancestors of one's family. Okay, so much like how we keep things like photographs or like old artifacts, that belong to our grandparents and great-grandparents that have cultural and emotional significance. The Romans would do this too, and they would keep them in a very particular place in the house, and they had some sort of religious connotation as well. So now moving on to the Katabasis, or the going under / the trip to the underworld. We can divide it up into three sections. In section 1, we get the arrival in Italy in Cumae, where the Sibyl is. Okay, we get an ekphrasis of Daedalus' temple there. The Sibyl gives out some oracles to Aeneas about what's going to happen. And then Aeneas actually does go to the underworld after completing some tasks with the golden bow, etc. And then in section 2, we actually get the underworld. Okay, so we get Charon, who takes him across the river. He meets up with Dido, right? And there's an awkward encounter there, that's for sure. And then we see Tartarus, which is where all the bad people go, and the monsters, etc., and Elysium, where all the really good people go. So then in section 3, Aeneas meets up with Anchises. Okay, this is right at the very end. And so we find Anchises, quote, deep in a green valley, he was reviewing as a proud father the souls of his descendants yet to be born into the light, contemplating their destinies and their great deeds to come. Then we get the nice embrace. Aw, very cute. Aeneas meets up with Anchises again. There's lots of emotion there. But then more important for us, we get the bee simile, right, about the nations of souls swarming around like bees, which throws us back to the very intro to Virgil and the Aeneid. If you remember, Virgil got his start in poetry by writing didactic poetry about farming and beekeeping. Okay, so maybe it's no surprise we find bee similes here. And then we get Anchises' account of the souls. Okay, so we get death, purging, and then rebirth. And this is one of the main ways that Virgil elaborates on the Homeric model of the underworld. Okay, so it's not that certain souls just live their life on Earth and then die and then come to the underworld and that's where they stay forever. We get this kind of reincarnation system. So we might ask ourselves, why does Virgil change the traditional account of the afterlife to include these forms of reincarnation? Well, it becomes very clear when we think about Anchises looking over his descendants. Okay, Virgil, if you remember, is writing this poem for Octavian / Augustus as a national epic to secure his kind of new empire over Rome. And so what better way to do that than by claiming that you are descended from the most famous people of Roman history, for instance, and we get like a whole long list of these, right? The Alban kings, which are the early kings from Italy, Alba Longa specifically, which is not Rome. And so then we get the Roman kings, heroes of the Roman Republic, and you can see lists of names here. And then Anchises says, your mission, Roman, is to rule the world. These will be your arts, to establish peace, to spare the humbled, and to conquer the proud. This is one of the most famous lines in the Aeneid because it outlines a very specific Roman mission that ties in with these themes of imperialism that we talked about at the very beginning of the novel. Okay, and so we're going to be returning to this line as we continue through the poem and talk about whether Aeneas and how Virgil talks about his descendants, whether Aeneas and his descendants fulfill this kind of mission. But more importantly, in this specific underworld scene, what Virgil is suggesting is that Octavian is a reborn Aeneas. Okay, so he's tying Octavian Augustus and his new regime to the very founding member of Roman society, to the guy who created everything that they know to be today for Virgil's audience. What kind of undercuts all of this, however, is that there are two gates of sleep, okay? Two gates through which dreams exit, which kind of looks back to the Odyssey and our discussion of the gates there. There's one of horn, which is true dreams or true prophecies, and then one of ivory, which is false dreams and false prophecies. Okay, and so if you remember, Aeneas ends up leaving through the gates of ivory. And so lots of ink has been spilled trying to figure out exactly what Virgil means by this. We're not sure if all of this story surrounding Anchises, the Roman mission, and everything he says Rome is going to be, if Virgil is saying that all of that's false or all of that's negative. That creates a certain negative reading of the Aeneid. Virgil is against Octavian Augustus and his new regime. Other people have read it more confusedly and said, well, Virgil's a proponent of Octavian and Augustus. Otherwise, he wouldn't be writing the book. And so this is a really key point in that problem, whether you have a pessimistic reading of the Aeneid, which is a negative reading that Virgil is against Octavian, or a positive reading, and that he's for the new regime. It's a very complicated issue, and I won't give my own opinion. I'll just let you guys think what you will about that. I don't think there's either a right or a wrong answer. The text is very complicated. But it's important to note that everything that comprises Book 6 in terms of the underworld scene, Virgil tells us that this is a false dream. Okay, so remember this going forward as we continue reading the Aeneid. We're going to refer back to Book 6 and Book 5 quite a bit. As always, if you have questions, post them in the discussion board or send me an email.